Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. O Lo'ingo o Susana Suisuiki. Coming up.
The decision today is a landmark decision.
Suspension of Samoa's opposition leaders found to be lawfully wrong. Also, Fiji's budget's considered to be balanced. And later,
another one asked me for 500 kina to help pay the rent for the next month.
A priest in PNG wants a fund set up for victims accused of sorcery. Samoa Supreme Court has declared Parliament's suspension of the opposition Human Rights Protection Party leader Tuilaepa Sailele Malele Ngaoi and Party Secretary Leala Ilepule Rimoni Ayafi unconstitutional. Lydia Lewis has the latest.
Chief Justice Satio Simativa Perese and Justice Leatawa Lesa Darrell Clark say the decision by Parliament to suspend the two MPs for 2 years breached the Constitution. Samoa's former Prime Minister Tuilaepa has described it as a landmark decision.
The decision today is a landmark decision.
He says it reaffirms that the right of free speech of all parliamentarians should be respected.
It greatly helped our parliament to be aware that the right of all the parliamentarians, the right of free speech, should be respected. And I am happy that the Speaker and the government, especially the leader, must recognize now the rule of law must be respected.
The two Human Rights Protection Party MPs must now be reinstated. They are entitled to be paid their remuneration and the allowances that were withheld on account of the terms of the suspension.
All eyes were on Fiji's leaders last week who said Fiji's budget was all about rebuilding the country's economy. To find out how well Sitiveni Rambuka's administration did in finding a fine balance, Rachel Nath spoke with the University of the South Pacific Senior Lecturer in Economics, Dr. Nilesh Gaunda.
Hello, Dr. Gaunda. Thank you for joining us. Now, a significant moment for Fiji receiving this Rebuilding Together budget on Friday.
Yes, Bula, Rachel. Yeah, the government has been able to provide a delicate balance given the difficult fiscal scenario. So going into the budget, there were a lot of concerns regarding the high debt level and how the government is going to balance revenue and expenditure given the debt level. But I think it has managed to do a good job given the difficult fiscal situation.
Do you feel the People's Coalition government delivered on the economic targets or the promises that were made before the budget announcement?
Yes, before the budget, the Prime Minister had actually indicated that this is going to be a tough budget and that tough choices will have to be made. I think he was referring to the increase in value-added tax from 9 to 15% on most of the items. At the same time, the government has been able to maintain zero rate on 21 items, which was already there, but they've added one more to that list, and which is prescribed medicine. So I think they have been able to deliver on what the promises that were actually made during the elections. For instance, one of the commitments of one of the members of the coalition government was abolition of tertiary education loans scheme, loans or debt. So
yes,
that has been abolished, which will provide relief to around 30,000 students and their families. But on the fiscal side of things, the government has already started a medium-term strategy to reduce debt level. For instance, by end of July next year, the debt to GDP ratio will come down to around 79%, which is a reduction of 6% of debt to GDP level. And I think it's really important to consider reducing debt in the short to medium term, because a high debt level will reduce government's flexibility in terms of the ability to deal with external shocks or natural disasters.
Right. So walk us through what we can see. Like, will we see a significant shift in the debt repayments within this 4 years of this government's time?
Yeah, so debt repayments actually fluctuates over the years, but this year is one of the highest repayments, which is close to $1 billion, which means that if we are collecting $3.7 billion in revenue, $1 billion will actually go towards debt servicing, which is a huge sum. So if the debt is not controlled and the debt continues to grow, we are going to see similar scenarios in the future where more and more revenue that is generated will be going towards debt servicing requirements. So I think the government has set the ball rolling in terms of debt reduction, so that in the medium term it's able to rein the debt levels to sustainable levels.
Right. Okay, now let's talk about what you think this government couldn't deliver on, but were there promises that weren't met in this budget?
So I think there were a lot of talks about investment in health and roads and other infrastructure. They made a good start in terms of health investment, but more certainly will be required if we are to bring health standards up to international standards. We are just beginning to see an effort in terms of investment in infrastructure, but also investment that was supposed to be made 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So it's going to be a catch-up game, more to say, in terms of investment into health infrastructure and health services. But more certainly will be needed in the near future.
Right. And how would you have interpreted that? Like, what could have the government done in this budget to address these issues more strongly?
I think a more or a larger allocation to health would have made more sense, given that there is a lot of investment that is needed in improving infrastructure, but also strengthening health services. Moreover, if the salaries of civil servants were taken care of, it would have been great as well, because we are seeing an increased rate of migration from Fiji. So a higher salary would have been able to reduce some of that. It's not possible to reduce migration to a large extent, because if people want to migrate for economic reasons or better quality of life, nobody will be able to stop them. But we could reduce the rate of migration with better wages and better working facilities.
Just on the back of this, can we talk about what do you think, the decisions on the various sector allocations are? Like you mentioned, health could have received a bit more, but just generally, maybe talking about the big ticket items, what do you feel?
So the key sectors in Fiji's economy include services. Tourism is one of those services, but then there is also agriculture and manufacturing. So there is a strong focus on tourism. The tourism marketing grant has been increased to $30 million, and it's recognizing that more marketing needs to be done so that Fiji's tourism industry continues to be competitive and is able to attract tourists. There's also a focus on agriculture, which is important since 30 to 40% of the people still live in rural areas and connected to agriculture. Majority of the people whom we have defined as living in poverty live in rural areas and are connected to agriculture. So focus on agriculture is important, but more could have been allocated for agriculture and provided for. That could have been important to the agriculture sector, given the importance of the agriculture sector in terms of improving the lives of people in rural areas, and also in order to make a dent on poverty.
The president of Papua New Guinea's Divine Word University is calling for the establishment of a fund to help the victims of sorcery accusations. Accusing people of sorcery is a common occurrence in PNG, and while some of those unjustly accused die, others survive but wind up homeless and penniless. Father Philip Gibbs has been an advocate for the victims of sorcery-related violence for many years and wants to see this fund set up. He spoke with Don Wiseman.
Well, For a start, we need more preventative work, but that's a bit late for the victims, isn't it? For the victims, I was envisaging some sort of managed funding they could draw upon for things like medical costs and school fees, things like that are a real burden for the victims who are still living, the ones that survived and are still alive. I find them expressing their need a lot. Like just this morning, I got news from one. She's got to go and see a surgeon this afternoon at the hospital and probably mean another operation. And so she'll probably need another 500 kina to be able to have the operation. And another one asked me for 500 kina to help pay the rent for the next month because these people can't live at home anymore. They're rejected by their families, so they're living somewhere else and paying rent, and then comes the school fees. So I just feel that if there could be some sort of managed fund, but it would have to be properly managed, and I'm having all sorts of difficulties managing just trying to be a helper at the moment, but it would have to be more formalised somehow.
Money generated from where, do you think?
I think the government, together with some agencies, probably churches would be willing to contribute to something if it was set up properly. The problem is in Papua New Guinea, funds often tend to disappear. It's very difficult to have a properly managed fund in a place like this.
How many people are in a situation at this point across PNG as a result of sorcery attacks?
Well, people would be in different situations. There would be some who are genuine refugees, who are living as refugees, and I would say that they would number in the hundreds, if not the thousands, because many of them, for instance, would have escaped to a place like Lae or Port Moresby, try to get away from the situation that they've been in. I'd say there'd be, we're talking about well over 1,000 people. I haven't counted them myself. I personally would have contact with about 20, I suppose.
Yes, so it would need to be a substantial fund.
It would need to be substantial. If it's going to really be effective, yes, it would need to be substantial.
You touched on the matter of attempts to stop these sorcery-related attacks. Where are we at? Is the situation getting worse or better?
It's difficult to say either, but we're certainly becoming more aware of them. I think the publicity about such cases is increased so that we hear more about cases now than we did before. And we realize now that it's more widespread, whereas before they might have pointed out to one or two Highlands provinces or something like that, and now we realize, no, it's happening in coastal places as well, and so on. So the government has done a commendable job of setting up a permanent committee, a parliamentary committee. And I was asked to come and speak to that committee recently, and I was there with a number of very good people. I wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket, but it's good to have it at that level where there's actually now a permanent committee with some very good people on it. So brought it to the attention of the government, and they've spoken pretty honestly about the funding and how the previous funding was just not used properly. And I was there when they were grilling the government people who'd received the funding and not used it properly. We hear the stories and you think everything's okay, and then bang, it comes out again. So yeah, I'm unable to say whether it's getting worse or getting better. It's still a problem, especially when someone dies and then they're looking around for the reason why that person's died, and then they start pointing the finger at people. I don't want to give a pessimistic picture about Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is a wonderful place, but there are some aspects of life which are really very painful, very, very sad.
That's Pacific Waves for today. To listen back, head over to rnzi.com/programs. You can also download us on Apple, Spotify and iHeartRadio podcasts. From myself and the team here at RNZ Pacific, Taufa Soifua.